As the Second World War turned against Germany, desperate scientists designed radical new weapons to turn the tide of battle. These highly experimental aircraft pushed the absolute limits of aviation technology, but they ultimately proved too strange and unreliable for combat. Today, we are looking at 8 bizarre Luftwaffe X-planes that failed to save the Third Reich. The Blohm Voss BV 141 was one of the most unusual aircraft ever built because it was completely asymmetrical. Designed originally as the Hamburger Flugzeugbau HA 141, this strange machine was intended to serve as a tactical reconnaissance aircraft. Instead of placing the cockpit in the center of the fuselage, the designers moved the entire crew cabin far out onto the right wing. The main fuselage housed the engine and tail, while a separate glass cabin sat on the wing. This gave the pilot an incredibly clear view of the ground below, which was perfect for spotting enemy troops. However, the bizarre layout caused major problems during flight testing. Many highly skilled test pilots reported feeling physically sick when flying the aircraft due to its unorthodox shape and strange handling. The Reich Air Ministry strongly preferred standard symmetrical designs that were easier to manufacture. Because of these strict preferences and the dizzying effect it had on pilots, the BV-141 was only tested in small quantities and never entered widespread service. The Junkers U-322 Mammut, or Mammoth, was an absolute giant of the sky that proved bigger is not always better. The military desperately needed massive transport gliders to move heavy equipment and troops across the battlefields of Europe. They hoped this giant could carry heavy tanks directly to the front lines. To meet this demand, engineers created the Junkers EF-94 project, resulting in a massive wooden glider with a staggering wingspan of nearly 65 meters. The sheer size of this wooden beast meant it required incredibly powerful towing aircraft to get off the ground. During its first test flight, the Mammut was towed into the air by a large Junkers transport plane. Almost immediately, the gigantic glider demonstrated terrifying instability, violently bouncing and pulling against the tow cable. The situation became so dangerous that the pilot of the towing plane had to release the cable in an emergency. The enormous Mammut flew only a short distance before crashing, and the entire project was swiftly canceled. The Focke-Wulf Fw 191 was designed to win the highly competitive Bomber B contest, but it was doomed by terrible engine problems. The German Air Force wanted a highly advanced and heavily armed medium bomber that could fly deep into enemy territory. The program required a plane that could carry a massive bomb load while outrunning enemy interceptors. Focke-Wulf engineers first built full-scale wooden mock-ups to prove the crew could operate the complex instruments in the cramped cockpit. When the flying prototypes were built, they faced immediate power issues. The plane was initially forced to use weaker BMW engines because the heavy piston engines it needed were not available. Later prototypes were fitted with the rare UMO 222 double radial engines, but these proved far too unreliable to be used under combat conditions. Engineers proposed swapping the engines again, but constant delays and mechanical failures meant the Fw 191 never became the advanced bomber the military desperately wanted. The Messerschmitt Me 264 was an incredibly ambitious heavy bomber designed to strike targets directly on the American East Coast. Known as the America Bomber, this 4-engine giant was meant to fly all the way from Europe across the Atlantic Ocean. The plan was to launch from bases in Europe, bomb industrial targets in New York, and return safely without refueling. The forward fuselage was essentially a massive glass greenhouse, giving the crew excellent visibility for long-range navigation over the ocean. Despite the terrifying potential of such a weapon, the German aviation industry lacked the resources and time to make it a reality. Only one single experimental prototype of the Me-264 was ever fully completed and flown. A second prototype was under construction but was completely destroyed during a massive Allied bombing raid. As the war turned against Germany and the need for defensive fighters became urgent, the long-range bomber project was finally canceled, and the remaining parts were scrapped. The DFS-228 was a secretive, rocket-powered reconnaissance aircraft designed to fly higher than any enemy fighter could ever reach. The military wanted a spy plane that could glide silently at an astonishing altitude of 20,000 meters, taking detailed photographs of Allied positions. The pilot lay flat on his stomach inside a pressurized cabin to survive the freezing, thin air of the stratosphere. Because it was a rocket-powered glider, it could not take off on its own from a standard runway. Instead, it had to be carried high into the sky, mounted on the back of a large Dornier Do 217 bomber. Once dropped, the pilot would ignite the rocket engine to blast even higher into the sky. Only 2 of these extreme high-altitude aircraft were ever completed. The first prototype was tested late in the war, and the second was destroyed during an Allied air raid at the Rechlin Testing Center. The surviving aircraft was eventually captured by American ground forces. The Junkers U-287 was a multi-engine jet bomber that looked like a bizarre Frankenstein monster stitched together from other aircraft. The most striking feature of this strange plane was its forward-swept wings, a radical design intended to provide better lift at low speeds. Engineers believed the forward-swept wings would allow the heavy bomber to take off from shorter, damaged runways. Because Germany was running out of raw materials, the engineers built the prototype using whatever spare parts they could find. The main fuselage was taken directly from a Heinkel heavy bomber, while the tail section was ripped from a Junkers U-188. Even more surprisingly, the front landing gear was scavenged from a captured American B-24 Liberator bomber. Despite its strange appearance and patched-together construction, the aircraft actually flew quite well during its initial test flights. However, only 2 prototypes were ever built before the war ended, leaving this bizarre forward-swept jet as nothing more than a strange footnote in aviation history. The Horten H IX V2 was a revolutionary jet-powered flying wing that looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie. Unlike traditional airplanes, this sleek machine had no tail, no distinct fuselage, and no vertical stabilizers, making it incredibly fast. Some historians even consider this smooth, tailless design to be one of the earliest attempts at primitive stealth technology. Powered by 2 advanced UMO jet engines, the flying wing was designed to slip through the air with minimal drag. Test pilot Erwin Ziller took the futuristic aircraft into the sky for its official test flights in the final months of the war. Unfortunately, the early jet engines of the era were notoriously fragile and prone to sudden failure. During a critical test flight, one of the jet engines completely died in midair, throwing the unstable flying wing into a violent spin. The aircraft hit the ground wingtip first and was totally destroyed, tragically killing Ziller and dealing a fatal blow to the project. The Bachem Ba 349 Natter, or Adder, was a terrifying rocket-powered interceptor designed to launch vertically like a modern space shuttle. As massive fleets of Allied bombers pounded German cities, the military demanded a cheap fighter that did not need a traditional runway. They were launched from simple vertical towers, hidden deep inside forests, to protect them from enemy bombing raids. The Natter was built mostly out of wood and was meant to be blasted straight up into the bomber formations. After firing its nose-mounted rockets at the enemy planes, the pilot was supposed to eject and parachute to safety. The aircraft was incredibly dangerous, and early tests were conducted by towing it behind a bomber. When the first actual manned vertical launch was finally attempted, the results were absolutely disastrous. The sheer force of the launch caused the tiny wooden aircraft to lose control and slam violently back into the earth, instantly killing the test pilot. Which of these bizarre experimental aircraft do you think was the strangest invention of the war? Let us know your answer in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more military history.